Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 47. Sabrina's not sure about being given horse riding lessons, but as usual with this comic, her aunts ignore her complaining and try to control her anyways. Hilda says that she and Zelda really enjoyed it at her age, so at least they're well intentioned and not looking mean. She's asked if she's interested in riding a horse's English style, and Amy just has to show up even though it's not even her school. Amy doesn't have faith in Sabrina and says they're looking for stable hands too. Thankfully, Sabrina gives her a punishment for that, making her horse move insanely fast, and she gets dizzy and sick. Sabrina's shown a horse she likes, but he's called unrideable and wild. She's told to stick with a different horse instead. Why is an unrideable horse even here? Sabrina wants this horse because of the sad look in his eyes. She feels like she's the only one who can help him. The story cuts ahead to weeks later. She's told she's doing great and thanks her. She asks to ride the horse. She wishes the horse could tell her what's bothering it. Why doesn't she cast a spell to find the answer? Why doesn't she make it able to talk? Why didn't she think to do that earlier? The 70s cartoon had Sabrina think to do that right away. The horse makes the shape of a witch's hat in the hay. I wonder if it's not a normal horse. She decides to go to Hilda for advice, and Hilda says it's possible that Sabrina senses a bewitchment on Sentry. Salem assumes that the horse is under a spell like Salem was. Sabrina casts a spell telling magic to return him to his original form, which she never saw before, so I guess the magic tapped into his brain to know what his original form was. Why did the spell only work halfway? Oh good, that was his original form. The centaur says that a powerful dark sorcerer, that's redundant, all sorcerers are powerful, cursed him because his family and him refused to abandon their pasture so that he could build his castle on it. Wouldn't the mortals know that their king was a witch? He wants to rejoin his fellow centaurs, and Sabrina thinks he might be the last one. Hilda tells her there's a centaur preserve in the other realm. Then why didn't she know about the centaur preserve earlier? Why wasn't she told about it earlier by the woman in charge of her witch education? He asks what the other realm is, and out of complete nowhere, Sabrina says that back in his day, the mortal and other realm coexisted. But when mortals became suspicious of magical beings, a decision was made by the Ministry of Magic to shift the magical world. That does make more sense than another realm coincidentally developing human life, but never mind. What caused some of the humans on Earth to have witchcraft and not others? It'd make more sense if the other realm Earth had a lot of magic in it. You'd think that mortals would always hate the magical beings, so this would never be the case. Hilda says that because Serene Stables thinks that the centaur is their property, if he disappears with them, they'll be branded as horse thieves. Why is Hilda so stupid? It's immediately obvious that she could just brainwash them into not remembering Sentry anymore. She apologizes and turns Sentry back into a horse, and someone says she thought she heard a man's voice. Hilda says it was her and she was a little horse. Then all of a sudden, the blonde gets orange hair and says he sold the Sentry and the new owner should be here to pick him up soon. Hilda decides to zap home and check with Zelda, having faith in her to have an idea they wouldn't. Too bad their brains are too small to think to just brainwash the new owner into letting them have the horse for free. They warp to Zelda when she's having a bath. I do like that a little because it's realistic that sometimes when someone's warped to, they'll be in the middle of something. Sabrina apologizes and explains the situation. Sabrina warps and wonders why her aunts didn't follow her. She would have imagined them coming here. The new owner is going to take Sentry away, and Sabrina thinks she's too late because she's a complete idiot who's too stupid to remember that she can brainwash. She finds out that her aunts disguise themselves in needlessly cringeworthy ways. Zelda wanted to do this. Her painful dialogue doesn't encourage me to read it. She asks for the horse for a lot of money, and Hilda explains that they can afford it because of how much compound interest they've accumulated over the centuries. It couldn't be from the bank, because obviously the mortals involved would ask how that was possible. She should say they have tons of valuables and accumulated cash from how long they've been alive. Since the sitcom explained that Sabrina's aunts gave up their servants and rich lifestyle to raise Sabrina in a more humble way, it makes sense that she's just learning about this now. The truck flies, confusing the guy. And the Centaur shows up at the Centaur Preserve and coincidentally meets up with his own girlfriend we never heard of before, as well as his family, which we also didn't know about. This gives him a happier ending than I expected. He thanks Sabrina, not knowing how to repay her. The story ends with her riding him, thanking her aunts for complimenting her on her riding skills. In the next story, Sabrina's at the beach with both of her aunts at once, which is very rare. It also makes me wonder why this is happening because it's so rare. They have boring, predictable dialogue, and Salem surprises them. He was supposed to stay at home, but he wanted a bite of their tuna sandwich, and ended up being carted off in the cooler. He's told he can stay if he behaves. Sabrina is relieved that he actually left them some sandwiches. Zelda offers Sabrina some sunscreen, and Sabrina says she doesn't need any more freckles. Should any and more be one word there? She freaks out over the sunscreen being empty and thinks she'll burn to a crisp because she's a complete idiot. Why doesn't she immediately realize she can just zap up more? Hilda asks her why she doesn't conjure up more sunscreen, or a big beach hat. She creates a big beach hat. No one seems to react, and the hotter it gets, the bigger the hat gets. Oh, that won't get anyone suspicious at all. What an idiot. Why did she do that? How did it start growing out of control? Why are none of her spells stopping it? You'd think she'd at least warp it away. And all of this happened because Hilda somehow thought to tell her to zap up a beach hat. She attracts attention, and Salem says he'll find Zelda, and she wakes up Hilda. How did she fall asleep and not hear the commotion? Zelda casts a spell to make the ocean melt it. This story's stupid. The story ends with people wearing some big beach hats a week later, because she started a trend by herself, without being famous. In the next story, Sabrina says her aunts are on a Martian singles cruise for the next few days, so Landra wants a party at Sabrina's house, and a lot of the students want to go there right away. Salem says he doesn't know if Sabrina's aunts would approve. Since when would he care? She cleverly lies that she was planning on having a seafood buffet, and he changes his tune. I understand that she feels forced into this because she doesn't want to let people down, but she should have just said no. She answers the door and immediately Harvey kisses her. He says he was just named most valuable player of his softball league, and the gang's celebrating tonight and he wanted to make sure she would come there. She says she can't because she's got to study. Thankfully he humors her, and she felt bad for lying to him. The students show up early to help set up the party with magic. Meanwhile, Harvey's sad because Sabrina's not with him, and apologizes to Amy for being glum. At least it's Amy who decides to move the party to her house and not Harvey like I thought. She's still annoying though. She wants Harvey all to herself for the whole summer, somehow not getting that Sabrina would be mad at her. Sabrina says she feels guilty for lying to Harvey, and Shinji looks like a jealous snob saying, "Oh, your mortal friend." Harvey and his friends show up and realize this wasn't a study session. He asks angrily why she lied to him. Shinji uses magic, congratulates him saying his name, and he says that Harvey is the guy the party was for, showing him a cake with his name on it. And everyone congratulates Harvey. I'm glad Shinji did something to be useful again. He's a lot more useful than Harvey. He explains to him that they all go to Sabrina's summer school, and naturally thinks to tell Amy that the reason Harvey didn't know about this was that it was a surprise party. He lies that Amy was in on it the whole time, and that's why she suggested he show up. Harvey thankfully says he owes Sabrina an apology, and she says he doesn't, and tells him to have a good time. It's so ironic that even though Harvey went to a party full of witches, he didn't get freaked out by witnessing magic. If this was the 70s series, that happened. It's more realistic that they decided to humor Sabrina instead. The story ends with Amy being grabbed by a giant tentacle and screaming for help as Harvey snices Sabrina. The minute she'd call for help, she'd attract everyone's attention to this. We should have seen Sabrina erase everyone's memory of this after undoing it. Issue 48. Salem thanks Sabrina for bringing him along when she warps him to another realm campgrounds for a vacation. Landra is glad they could make it, and Salem says there's nothing cooler than a charm school campout. The writer trying to force this dumb, unnecessary idea on us some more. Hasn't she been to enough witch camps? This is lazy. They have to do target zapping. It's just an activity for fun. Why should I care? Sabrina's told that her aim was the most precise. Lilith gets mad and tries to show them her mark. Salem wastes time pushing her away, and her hand touches the target after it absorbed so much magic, which shocks her. Why did he bother? A camp counselor says it might have been the end of her if it weren't for Salem. Now I have a question. Why was a camp counselor allowed to put a lethal hazard in their camp? After Lilith and Salem get zapped to the school nurse for a quick checkup, out of nowhere we see Enchantress call Lilith her baby and ask her if she's alright, and say that she got here as fast as she could. It's not like her to act like she cares about anyone. So I'm wondering if she's actually being sincere. She goes through the length of hugging her. That's the exact opposite of what I expected. I assumed she was a distant mother who didn't care about her at all and just bossed her around. Instead, she's a jerk because she's spoiled and is just annoyed by her affection. Enchantress changes her mind about rewarding the person who saved her daughter because of Salem. Even though she's a head witch, she says it's out of her hands and offends Sabrina by rewarding him with a catnip mouse. So Sabrina's an idiot by yelling at her. Surprisingly, Enchantress does decide to suspend the council spell on him temporarily. So she's not always evil in the 2000s comic. She says she'll allow him to take his wizard form 2 days each year. I think having him be immortal would be a lot more responsible, since that way he couldn't try to take over the world with his magic. And if that's all he was being punished for, all they really had to do was take away his powers. Salem thanks Enchantress and greets Sabrina's tired aunt in the morning as a human. I guess he left the house just to greet them at the door for a vent. He zaps a coffee cup to Zelda, and he says he's gonna live every minute to its fullest. He wants to visit some of his favorite old hangouts, magically gets them dressed and warps to the moon, where I have to assume they have magical air bubbles with warm air to keep them alive. He plays golf because it's the easiest place to get a hole-in-one. Then he goes to Mars to surf the canals with an alien that somehow wasn't discovered by now. And then he wants to go to the rings of Saturn for a ski trip. Mortals also didn't discover that. I guess it's not the mortal realms Mars and Saturn, but it's sloppy of the story to not explain that. We cut to Sabrina's family playing cards, and they decide to check on Salem because he's been missing for a while. He was taken away by the police because he didn't know it's now illegal to ski on the rings of Saturn because it's dangerous. Logically, he would have just used magic to instantly get out of that situation. It's sloppy of the story to not explain that they had witchcraft depowering handcuffs or tasers, or to explain that they saw him in a crystal ball and warped them to them, so it wouldn't matter if he warped away. He's gonna be given a 2-day sentence in jail, so he's sent home right after Enchantress' spell wore off. And all of this happened because he inexplicably insisted on skiing there and not somewhere on Earth. I would have expected him to do all of his fun activities on Earth. In the comedy page, Sabrina's aunts are mad at Harvey for getting her home late because his car breaks down, and he says it's not his fault he doesn't have a reliable form of transportation for her. So he gets turned into a donkey. In the next story, Sabrina tries to zap up a new swimsuit for herself and ends up with a giant one, and asks her aunts what's happening. Hilda says that the present planetary alignment is affecting their magic so that everything comes out giant size. This is going to be a contrived story. It doesn't require any talent to come up with the idea that everything they're creating is now bigger. Then Sabrina turns down Zelda's bikini with no explanation and quickly decides to zap up a swimsuit for her doll, so it comes out big enough for her. I like how quickly she came up with a workaround. Why would she have to go to magic school again? Still, she was lucky this worked out for her and the swimsuit was her exact size. Realistically, she'd need to use magic and measurements to work it out, find out how much bigger things turn out. When she tries to zap up a very small ice cream bar, then because bullshit, she gets a giant one for no reason. So she gets asked where she got it. Then a new planetary alignment happens to affect magic in a strange new way. This is so confusing. It could only happen if the planets were magical. Even then, wouldn't witches have gotten rid of this phenomenon with their combined magic by now? I guess the planets are too magical for that. Sabrina says that was fun and sees a woman fishing up a fish that's big enough to win the contest. The winner gets free dinners. And when the woman asks the guy to be her date to the victory dinner tonight, for some reason Sabrina forgets she has a boyfriend already and demands to enter the contest, even though it would clearly be cheating. She gets punished in the most predictable way imaginable. I was looking forward to whatever new way her magic was going to be influenced, but it's just the reverse of before. I didn't think it'd be that predictable. Sabrina had to walk back home because she tried to zap up a broom and got a tiny one. That's still stupid because she would have just warped home. You'd think if Harvey loved her, she could have just called him up for a ride. In the next story, Salem doesn't get to watch his favorite reality show where he sadistically watches people eat bugs because Sabrina's family is watching a show where someone pretends to understand what someone's pets are saying. And somehow the people on her show didn't stop trusting her when she started saying that the dogs want her sponsor's flea powder on them. You'd think witches would be more suspicious of this kind of thing. It always seems to be a girl who's portrayed as believing in psychics, like Penny, for example. Which makes me wonder if it's actually some stealth sexist joke, because it's never making fun of a guy. Salem reveals that the dog was actually asking for a belly rub, and reminds his family that he can understand animal languages just because he was turned into a cat. The woman says she's gonna come to Sabrina's town for the sake of the plot, so Salem decides to go to the show to expose her. But he does know he's not allowed to reveal he can talk, right? Did he think this through? Why does Sabrina think she's gonna tell everyone Salem's deepest thoughts? Whoever heard of an animal psychic? I feel like this story wouldn't happen either. Salem whispers to Sabrina in the audience, telling her that the fraud was wrong. Lucky for him, nobody on stage is looking at his mouth moving. Predictably, he wants to get a turn up there. Sabrina actually uses magic to guarantee that. Salem thanks Sabrina, and when the fraud lies about what he says that's not what he said, and that stuff stinks. He calls her a quack, revealing that he can talk on live television. Isn't anyone going to explain that the Witches' Council would punish him for revealing he can talk? Thankfully, the woman believes Salem about the kid pulling that dog's tail. Salem tells the pets to attack the fraud, so she says she hates animals, which she should know would only get herself in trouble, but she is being attacked by them. Then someone says that Sabrina is using a cat ventriloquist dummy to expose the animal psychic. It's weird that they thought it was a dummy in particular, considering how he was moving around, and considering how realistic his lip syncs were. Salem's clearly offended, but nobody takes the hint. The show gets cancelled, and Zelda congratulates Salem. The story ends with Salem getting ordered an anchovy pizza after he makes an unfunny, sarcastic joke. The first story is about Sabrina getting forced to take horse riding lessons just to find out weeks later than she should have that an unrideable horse that's luckily still being taken care of out of pity is actually a centaur who was turned into a horse as a punishment by an evil wizard with a castle. Hilda and Zelda need to pretend to be people wanting to buy the horse so they won't be accused of stealing it. And somehow he reunites with his girlfriend when he's taken to a centaur preserve. Won't Sabrina have used magic to make the horse able to tell her what's making it sad on the first day? In the second story, when Sabrina runs out of sunscreen, for some reason one of her aunts suggests a beach hat, and she zaps one up instead of just getting more sunscreen. And for no reason the hat keeps on growing and she doesn't instantly get it to stop with her magic. So that was confusing. Since when did she go to the beach with both of her aunts? In the third story, Harvey catches her at a party her magic school friends were having at her house when he thought she was busy studying and couldn't spend time with him. And Shinji actually covers for her by saying it's a surprise party for him. Which surprised me because I thought he'd want Harvey to break up with her. Instead, it turns out that he doesn't want Sabrina to get upset. I'm glad I wasn't supposed to believe that he was oblivious to magic over and over again, with him there the whole time. The first story of issue 48 by Bill Gallagher was about Salem having rescued Enchantress's daughter, living it up as a warlock again as a reward. Instead of feeling remotely grounded in reality, this story has him surfing in Mars, so his scenes are a bit off-putting because it's not explained why him and the other witches survived being on the moon or Mars and had aliens around them in the mortal realm that weren't discovered yet. Since Salem can run around on 2 feet as a cat, there's no reason he couldn't have done everything in the story as a cat anyways, just with a smaller golf club Sabrina would summon. He tries to have fun on some planetary rings and gets held in jail for 2 days as a punishment for a crime he didn't know he broke. So that's depressing. Why would Enchantra let him have magic? There was already a story in the 90s comic where Salem was a human, and I thought that was more awesome, and more grounded in reality. The second story by George Glatter was about the things summoned by witches being giant-sized for no good reason just because of a planetary alignment, even though magic comes from something inside them. So why would that create interference? At least she had fun eating that giant ice cream bar, but we had to just take her word for it. It is good that Sabrina didn't win the pitching contest because she didn't deserve to if she was trying to cheat at it. But it went too far, making it seem like just a depressing, contrived story at the end because she thought she had to walk home. She probably assumed if she warped home, she'd end up tiny. In the final story, as Salem exposed someone who pretends she can read animals' minds on TV as a fraud. He thinks he can get away with talking in front of mortals now. And we never see him get punished. It was actually a really awesome moment of his. But it would have been more awesome to experience for the first time if I was told that he's not going to get punished for talking in front of people. And he gets away with it because they assumed Sabrina was being a ventriloquist, even though it'd be impossible to get a cat to move his mouth like a person with the right timing like that. And she even said, huh. This story just makes me annoyed that people are gullible enough to believe in pet psychics and worry that there's people being fooled by that in real life, when it's the easiest thing to lie about ever. And while it was satisfying that the villain got exposed as a liar and doesn't get to do that anymore, I'm not sure if the lying was hurting anyone, just wasting people's time and making fools out of them.